This is just a casual conversation, so you
Yeah.
guys can relax.
Okay.
This is definitely not NPR.
Is the Black VC Diversity VC Happy Hour at AfroTech. Is the release of our report called the Equity Record.
That's Sarah and Ashley here, and I would love for you to tell us a bit more about this event and why you decided to host this event.
Sure. So I can say maybe a little bit about Diversity VC, and then I'll let Ashley talk about the event specifically. So Diversity VC is a global nonprofit. We focus on increasing representation and inclusion in the venture ecosystem. We believe that the more representative that venture investors are, the more representative founders will be, and the more representative technology will be across the fabric of society. And so we work in a couple of different areas. One is an internship program. We have a certification for funds to go through, and then we have a data report that we put out on a regular basis. And that is kind of the impetus for this event in particular, but I'll let Ashley talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So Sarah's absolutely right. I mean, the genesis for this is the release of the Equity Record report that we at Diversity VC have been working on for, this particular one for the last 18 months, but it's part of a series of reports. And we wanted to do something to celebrate and mark the occasion. This report is something that, not just us, but, our sponsors, our partners have been working on tirelessly. And we thought, let's put together a roadshow where we travel across the country hosting events in different cities. So we were in San Francisco and Los Angeles last week, had to be at AfroTech today, hosting with Black VC. We head to Chicago tomorrow and then New York on Thursday. And in each city, we're hosting an event with a slightly different flavor, I would say. So this is very much a celebratory happy hour. We're getting just folks together in a kind of more casual, informal way, having some drinks, having some tacos, and talking about what we're doing. The other cities, maybe a little bit more of a formal sit-down, salon-style discussion. In LA, we had a sort of, a party as well with Upfront Ventures. We had a dinner, and then we went to a screening of Black Panther, which was amazing. So yeah, just kind of mixing and matching depending on the vibe.
I love the fact that you're taking each city into consideration. And when you're like, we're here with tacos, we're just relaxing, that's very Austin. So can you introduce the findings, introduce the report and the findings to people that are very interested and impacted by what you're doing?
So the Equity Record is, as Ashley said, the third in a series of reports. The first two that we did were focused on who are the founders that are receiving capital and what do the demographics of those founders look like. Very intersectional perspective. So race, gender, educational attainment, geography. And after doing that report we did it twice over the course of 3 years, the numbers hadn't changed. And so I think a lot of people familiar with the venture, the startup ecosystem, are familiar with the numbers of how much funding actually goes to female teams, to people of color, to LGBTQ+, to disabled founders. It's hovered at about 2% for years. And that hasn't changed despite more attention, despite commitments. And so we wanted to look the next layer up and say, what's kind of causing the issue of not as much capital flowing to these founders? And so we did a survey, as Ashley said, over the course of this year, looking at VC funds. Where are they allocating their capital? How are they deciding whether or not to use diversity and inclusion as a lens for allocating that capital? And I think that the headline finding from the report is that only 1.87% of all of the assets under management that we surveyed, but we do think it's representative of the entire venture industry, is specifically allocated to investing in underrepresented founders, broadly defined. So women, people of color, LGBTQ+, the whole spectrum. And our perspective on that is that tracks exactly to why you're not seeing an increase in the amount of capital that's flowing to those founders, because LPs aren't focused on it, GPs are not focused on it enough to really move the needle. And so the kind of call to action that we're making for LPs in particular, but GPs as well, is to kind of reevaluate how you're using that as a lens, but also to think about what are the structural barriers that exist for those GPs or the VCs from underrepresented backgrounds to starting a fund, to raising capital from an institutional limited partner, and really trying to rethink how is it that we can allocate more capital towards these communities.
That is very interesting. Oh, Ashlyn, you were getting ready to jump
No,
in
I
there.
was just going to say, Sarah has summed it up beautifully and eloquently, as she always does. But the only thing I'll add to what she said is that, you know, this is a line in the sand, and this is the first of a series of reports that we will continue to put out looking at this question to see, can we track change over time? You know, if we are calling this out and we're saying, hey guys, like, you know, you said that all this capital was going to go to underrepresented GPs and then eventually founders. Mm-hmm. Are you actually living up to your word or not? And so we're hoping that we can see progress.
I have what you just said, Sarah. Oh my gosh, unbelievable. And I would love to hear some numbers attached to that, because you're right. I feel like forever everyone keeps touting the same 2%. The same 2%. It represents everyone. So where is the money going? Because we're talking about where the money isn't going. So where is it going?
So we surveyed almost 32 billion in assets under management across about 200, a little over 200 VCs. Mm-hmm. 580 so of that is allocated specifically to what we term DEI investments. So investments that have an explicit, like they are marked for investment into underrepresented founders.
Okay.
And so that's where you get that 1.87%. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of the funds that are allocated to those underrepresented founders is happening at the pre-seed and the seed levels. And so you don't see as many funds that have a diversity carve out, or that they've dedicated any money, if not all of it, to diversity investments. And so you see it, but it's pretty actually standard across like industry investments. Like those funds look similar across the board. In terms of what we were actually surprised by was the educational attainment and the immigration status of a lot of the GPs at funds, whether or not they have a DEI focus or not, is the same. But women are about twice as likely to be represented in the general partnership of a fund that has a DEI focus, and people of color or non-white people are about 5 times as likely to be represented in a DEI fund. And so we took that to indicate that really there is either, it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing, but either a fund is more likely to have a DEI mandate if they have somebody from an underrepresented demographic in their partnership, or those people are more drawn to the funds that already have those. And so how do we get more of those people into check writing positions? How do we allocate more capital to these founders? Mm-hmm. Is one of the takeaways from the report. One of the other data points that I'll quote is, we looked at, and we have a small amount of data for this, but what are the different demographics that these funds that do have a DEI focus are focusing on? And it's very much women and people who identify as Black. The LGBTQ, veteran, Latine are quite small, and we didn't have a single fund that was focused on disability. So
I think it's interesting because I know when viewers and just people looking to get into tech and they have this idea and they're founders, and I've had people come up and say, well, you know, only 2% of women get funded, or only 2% of African Americans, or 2%. And they're always asking me that same question. Who is getting funded? Where is that going? And what does that avatar look like? So maybe I need to tap into that community. I've heard that conversation. And when you look at that, I know the question is kind of like, what does that look like? Who actually is getting the funding? Not necessarily the DEI funding, but the general funding.
That's something that we looked at in our prior reports, actually. You know, where was the money going? And I don't think what we're about to say is going to shock anyone. But,
I'm just waiting for the answer. Yeah, where is it going?
It's predominantly going to white, Ivy League educated men.
Okay.
That's where the lion's share of the capital is flowing to, and that's not surprising, you know, as Sarah was saying, because the majority...
Well, I think you just said it. That's where the other 98% is going. And I think that's interesting because I'm thinking of a venture capital event that I was at, and at South by Southwest, and I in a conversation with the VC, and they focus on Series A. And one of the questions that I asked him is, do you have DEI efforts? Like, what does that look like? And he said, you know, we've never really thought about it. And we went on in conversation, and one key takeaway and I tell this story all the time, is he said, you know, I never think about it because I don't think that anyone's being excluding anyone. He said, I just know that I tend to write checks to people I know.
Yes.
And I tend to write checks to people, and I followed up. I said, well, how do you know them? Let's just say they're not here at South by Southwest at a private venture capital event like me.
It costs money to go to.
Talking to you. What if they're not me?
Yes.
How does someone in another part of the country, how do they connect with you?
Right.
And his answer to me was shocking, and I guess not that shocking to you guys, but his answer was, well, I would meet them at school, that's someone I know, or I would get introduced to them. That's it. He's like, yeah, I would meet him at school, or I would get introduced to them, or maybe my wife would introduce me, or that's his outreach effort. So what's your thoughts on that?
I think, we have definitely
I love your smile. Sarah's like, I can't.
I'm hiding myself from the camera because my mher has always said, like, your face does not hide emotion.
No, please.
Hard on your sleeve, Sarah. But I mean, anecdotally, it's true. I mean, and beyond anecdotally, but I mean, the fact is that historically, many VCs they didn't only rely on, they were proud of the fact that there was the network, and to get into the room, the inner sanctum, you had to be brought in by somebody who was within the inner sanctum. And of course, those connections come from, oh, I went to Harvard, you went to Harvard, we should have a chat, And of course, that just excludes so many other brilliant, talented people that should be having the conversations, but just never even get a chance.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think that there have been a lot of efforts over the last couple of years in particular. Like, people recognize that that's a problem. I think that there's different levels of effort that are made by different VCs to correct that problem. And so part of what we do with Diversity VC, we have a certification that funds go through called the Diversity VC Standard, which evaluates where are you getting your deal flow? Do you have goals around, like, the percentage of your deal flow that comes from underrepresented founders or from a certain demographic? And we will put you in touch with different organizations or nonprofits or whatever group that, if you are committed to increasing your deal flow from those sources, we have places that will provide that to you, but you have to make the commitment and you have to follow through on that.
What's your response to people who don't necessarily, I'm thinking of this gentleman in particular, what's your response to people who don't necessarily see that there is an issue? I don't know if you ran into that. If you've run into
Sadly, all too often.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, what's
last
your,
week.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah, well, Sarah's right. Just last week we were having dinner, and with a couple of folks, and their perspective was, we don't have time to build pipeline into underrepresented communities. We're so busy. How are we going to source these folks? Not that we would say no to having a conversation with them, but it's not our responsibility to go and look for them, right? And for us in that moment, we talked about it afterwards, and it's a difficult moment to interact with these kind of folks with, because there's naturally a lot of passion and sentiment that arises.
It's a different response, because even in that conversation, they acknowledge what you brought to the table. They acknowledge that, okay, well, we could do this. We just don't have the bandwidth to accomplish this goal. But in situations where someone doesn't feel that there is an issue that needs to be corrected or resolved, how do you handle that?
Yeah, I think I think that sometimes comes down to the data. That we can say, a lot of the funds that are focused on underrepresented founders in particular are saying this is an overlooked group, and it's not, they are underestimated. They're not they're not underrepresented in the sense that in society this is an underrepresented demographic. They are underrepresented in this industry because there are structural barriers to them getting access to capital, to introductions, to networks. And so if you can provide that data to them that shows, hey, actually they perform better, and actually they build better companies, and they have greater amounts of revenue, like that, to me, tends to be the thing that makes VCs say, like, oh, I'm missing out on money? Like, now you got me.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate that has to be, like, we would love for it to be like, no, this is the right thing, and you're, like, everybody is responsible for this, but ultimately it will come down to what returns look like. And so if you can demonstrate that returns are better, then they start to pay a little bit more attention.
I think that is really Kevin, that's his name, Kevin O'Leary, and how he's popularized the fact that his investments in women have the highest returns in all of his portfolio companies that he's invested. I'm sure you guys have seen him talk about that online all the time. And I think other people start to tune in to say, oh, okay, let me look at that differently. And obviously coupled with the data, but having that visibility of people who will use their voice in order to champion your initiative. So what is the next step? I know you're on your roadshow and you're introducing your report, and you said you've been 18 months working on this particular report. So tell me what's next for Black VC, Diversity VC, the event, and how you guys are collabing in the future.
Well, I think we'll get through this, and then and we have really grand plans for the future. You know, there's a lot of people that we've been meeting at these events that we plan to follow up with. So, you know, whether it's bringing them in as advisors, you know, to help us think through, okay, now we've done this report, now we've gotten it out there into the world, how do we evolve it? You know, how do we continue to make sure that this isn't just a conversation that we're having, and we actually have actionable next steps? So, you know, we're just a small volunteer-run organization. We need the other people, the other partners and sponsors coming in to help us think through some of this. So getting those folks in a room and having that chat is probably the first port of call. Thereafter, I mean, it depends a little bit on, if I speak quite candidly, you know, what kind of funding we can get to support those efforts. So, you know,
I'm glad you brought that up. That was actually something that I was thinking, like, how are you able to fund this? How are you able to move this initiative forward?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in this particular case, we, you know, when we first started writing the report, we just did it off our own backs, you know, out of like.
Well, you're just a startup. You're like, I'm a founder.
Yeah, exactly.
We're just bootstrapping it.
Yeah, and then what happened was that, you know, people started to take notice, and then we were able to go to the likes of our sponsors, Silicon Valley Bank, AWS, and say, hey, like, look at what we've been doing. What do you think? We know this is something you care about. Would you like to be on this journey with us? And they said yes, you know, and they said, okay, we'll help you, we'll put some money behind it, we'll support you and battle, you know, sort of pitch ideas with you. And so that was how we then got to where we are now, because this latest report took a lot more heavy lifting, I would say, in terms of the manual data collection that had to be done.
I would say that what Diversity VC has done historically is data is always the foundation for everything that we do. And so we have an internship program that was really created out of a recognition that there wasn't a pipeline of underrepresented talent at the lowest levels of VC. So how were you supposed to get partners and check writers who were from underrepresented backgrounds? The Diversity VC standard came out of recognizing that a lot of funds didn't have policies or practices that were really best practice when it came to DEI and VC. And so I could also see this report potentially becoming like, are we putting together a toolkit? Are we, it could be something written, it could be, you know, a series of events that we don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, but something that is really convening people and trying to talk about what are we doing today that is not working and how do we rewrite that? And so we have the data foundation to be able to have that conversation, but then how do we either create, like I said, the toolkit to say, here's how you go about undoing this and restructuring it, or like how do we partner with different organizations who can help us to accomplish that?
And actually, just to add to that, you know, we are hosting tonight with Black VC. You know, there are many other organizations, not many, but there are a few other organizations that are doing really important work that we want to continue working with. Black VC, VC Familia, you know, there's a couple others that we just see as there's great synergies between the work that we're doing, and we want to continue collaborating.
And it helps you tap directly into each one of those communities. Thank you guys so much.
No, thank you.
Thank
Again,
you.
Tell us where people can learn and really support what you're doing and support your efforts, support your mission, and where they can find you guys online.
Well, on our website, that's a good place to start. The URL is diversity.vc, and you can download.
That's a good one.
Yeah, good to get that one. And then you can download our report from there as well. It's just easy, free to download, the equity record. And then you can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us on Twitter. You know, actually don't know what our handles are.
At Diversity VC.
There we go.
There we
We're
go.
keeping it simple.
Well, thank you guys so much. And again, diversity.vc with black.vc, and we're here at AfroTech. And this is such an amazing experience to bring people together in a way that will allow them to connect and, like you said, eat tacos, get to know each other, and really just kind of relax and have really serious conversations and build relationships. And I think that's key, and it'll be key moving forward for what you're doing. So I'm really excited to be a part of it. Thank you guys so much, and we appreciate you for chatting with us and introducing your new report.
Thank you.